For almost 2 years, the entire world witnessed the outbreak of a new virus. And with the spread of that virus, the world has also seen the rise of tyranny, authoritarianism, and basically dictatorships in countries previously said to be democracies. These authoritarian governments started stripping away their citizens of the usual freedoms in democratic countries, all with the excuse that it was to stop the spread of the virus or to save their respective national health systems. Yet, even with the vaccines, the tyranny did not end, and the freedoms stripped from the citizens did not return, or have returned but with arbitrary restrictions that are not based on real science concerning the virus or even the vaccines. The coronavirus pandemic was political from the start, and the health of any person in the world was not really a priority for almost any government around the world. It was used to further the ideological agenda of those governments, especially from the left and far left. And this is made even more obvious when you consider the fact that barely any country in the world, especially with a left or far left government, has tried to know the truth about the origins of the virus that changed the world. In fact, most governments, social media and media outlets in general around the world have tried to censor and ban everyone that suggested the possibility of the virus being a lab creation. And given the data supplied by scientists, intelligence officers, and also the behavior and cooperation between the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization, the lab creation theory is no longer a theory, it's the most plausible possibility. I already talked about the Great Reset and how this pandemic was not a coincidence, when the World Economic Forum and the Bill Gates Foundation were hosting Event 201. That effectively simulated a world pandemic with a coronavirus at the same time that COVID-19 was already spreading in China. I also talked about how the Chinese Communist Party, with the assistance of the World Health Organization, helped spread the virus all over the world, while trying to cover up or destroy any evidence of the origins of the virus. And in today's video I'll go into even more details about the origins of the virus, who was involved in its creation and cover-up, and why nothing was done to stop the spread, when it could have been easily prevented, just like with other viruses in the past. Let's start with the fact that China's military was discussing the weaponization of coronaviruses for the purposes of war back in 2015. In these recently revealed documents, the People's Liberation Army scientists and weapon experts refer to SARS coronaviruses as a new era of genetic weapons that can be artificially manipulated into an emerging human disease virus, then weaponized and unleashed in a way never seen before. This alone should be enough to send shivers down your spine given what happened in 2020. But as we've seen, the world governments are more concerned with beating up and arresting their citizens because they are not wearing a mask or don't have a vaccine passport. Then we have the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the laboratory in the center of all this, that was created with the help of the French, that provided the lab design, much of its technology, and even some biosafety training. And as a compensation for their help, the French only requested that they would be in the loop on the operations and research done in that lab. However, in 2015, China started pushing the French away from the previously agreed collaboration, something that made the French warn the US State Department about China's behavior, since the US also helped fund this lab. In 2017, China essentially banned the French from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and so the lab was now under complete control of the Chinese Communist Party. So what was really happening in the lab? What type of research was actually done there? One that we know of is called gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function research basically genetically manipulates viruses to gain certain functions that they didn't previously have. One of those functions is, for a virus usually only able to infect animals, to be able to infect humans. In other words, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they were changing coronavirus so that they could infect humans. The United States, much like the French, were funding this lab, but given how dangerous this type of research is, given its potential to create a world pandemic, Barack Obama stopped this funding back in 2014. But Anthony Fauci, the head of the United States National Institute of Health for Infectious Diseases, continued the funding of the lab, even if only by proxy. And that proxy was the EcoHealth Alliance that was awarded a $3.4 million grant by Fauci's NIH in an effort to protect people from viruses that jump from species to species. In reality, EcoHealth Alliance was using that money to hire the Wuhan Institute of Virology and do the gain-of-function research that essentially manipulated viruses to infect humans. And who is the head of EcoHealth Alliance and the main responsible for the use of this money for gain-of-function research? Peter Daszak. Even though directly linked to the Wuhan lab, Peter Daszak was one of the biggest advocates that COVID-19 originated naturally. He even published a letter with the support of experts to deny that COVID-19 was created in a lab, and that those that even mentioned that possibility were nothing more than conspiracy theorists. And if you recall, I talked about the World Health Organization sending a team to investigate the origins of the virus earlier this year, and how they would find nothing, because the Chinese Communist Party had more than a year to destroy any evidence that incriminated them. However, it was even worse than that, because who was picked by the World Health Organization to be a part of the team investigating the origins of the virus? That's right, Peter Daszak, the same man behind the funding of the lab for gain-of-function research. The World Health Organization had already done the worst possible job in managing this pandemic by spreading misinformation about the virus, namely that it didn't spread from person to person, or that travel restrictions were not needed, effectively helping the spread of the virus all over the world. But they went a step further and included Peter Daszak, a man directly tied to the Wuhan lab, to be a part of the team investigating the origins of the virus. Obviously, that investigation reached no conclusion. But then again, when you place the wolf guarding the chickens, you already know the results from the start. Recently, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act that exists in the United States, we learned that Anthony Fauci, the head of the NIH, was in direct contact with Peter Daszak, and that Daszak requested Fauci to push the narrative that the virus did not come from the lab, something that Fauci did without issues. In fact, in those emails, Fauci completely ignored those that talked about the possibility of the virus coming from a lab, while propagating the Peter Daszak and Chinese Communist Party narrative that the virus was either natural or came from outside China. In effect, Anthony Fauci lied about the funding of gain-of-function research, and the documents provided by the Freedom of Information Act not only proved that he lied, but also he helped cover up the origins of the virus, just like Peter Daszak. If you recall, there were some clashes between Donald Trump and Anthony Fauci, and the media around the world placed Fauci on a pedestal while demonizing Trump. Donald Trump was very vocal about wanting to punish those responsible for the spread of the virus, which is why he stopped funding the World Health Organization and also clearly blamed China for it. But people like Peter Daszak and Anthony Fauci claimed otherwise, and so the media followed the narrative they wanted to push, one that discredited Donald Trump and praised Fauci and Daszak, two men directly linked to the funding of the Wuhan lab and the gain-of-function research on coronavirus. As usual, the media propagated a purely political narrative that gave more credibility to those that are, in one way or another, connected with the existence of this pandemic. People were censored, people were banned from social media and media outlets all over the world, just for mentioning the possibility of the virus being created in the Wuhan lab. In essence, a big portion of the world governments and the media was pushing a false narrative, pure misinformation and lies about the virus, because if the virus was created in a lab, the tyranny and authoritarianism that we are still witnessing today would have no plausible reason to exist. But if this was a virus that originated naturally, which essentially is the narrative pushed by Anthony Fauci, Peter Daszak, and the media, then the public would be more open to restrictions to their freedoms instead of demanding the world to punish those responsible for the outbreak. Basically, the only question on the table is not if the virus was created in a lab. The only question left unanswered is if the virus was released on purpose, or was it just an accident. Given all the evidence I showed you in this video, it's very difficult to think it was an accident, because the evidence shows a clear world effort to cover up the origins of the virus. The evidence shows behavior that helped the spread of the virus for pure political reasons. The evidence shows that the pandemic was used to push political agendas and to strip rights away from citizens of the world democracies. And as history shows us, when a government takes away something from you and you let it, you'll never get it back. Unfortunately, this is not the plot of a movie. This is reality and the push to force vaccinate people, even children that are practically not affected by this virus, with what essentially is nothing more than an experimental drug that doesn't even cure people from the effects of the virus, makes me think this story is not over yet and more sordid details will only be known in the future. I hope you like this, and I'll see you next time.